Hello everyone, my name is Mark and this is Mark's Coding Projects. On this channel I will be sharing the projects that I'm currently working on in the hope that you can learn a thing or two. Today's video is going to be another of the Connect 4 in Java tutorial series, and I'm going to be building from carrying on from where we left off in the last video and talking about server connections. So in the last video, we made an inner class called connections, and the reason for this was we wanted an object that could contain multiple values that we could then store within our program. So what I mean by that is that the object will store various values about a specific connection to the server. So it can store a connection container, it can store Boolean, it can store an integer, that kind of thing. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put all of these connections in a list. And the reason we've done this is because we can't store all of these values in a list together. So I can't have a connection container next to a Boolean, next to an integer, that kind of thing. That doesn't work. So instead we sort of wrapped it in a single object, and we can store all the objects in the same list because they're all of the same type. So the reason that we're doing this is because the overall problem that we're working on is developing a solution whereby the server matches client connections together. So at the moment, the client can talk to the server and the server can talk to the client, but the server can't match up two clients so that they talk to each other. And that's what we're going to try and facilitate. So, like I said, the first thing was to keep a log of all connections to the server. So that's the first task that we've we've pretty much set it up. So we'll have a line of code where we add new connections to the array list. Moving on from this, what we're going to do is there's going to be some logic which is going to be tied to the creation of these objects. So what I mean by that is that if a connection joins, we're going to want to save it, but we're also going to want to check if we can match the connection to a connection we've already got in the server. So that's what we're going to be trying to do today. So when a connection is first made to the server, we're going to want to add the connection to our list. So we've created a new object and we've passed the socket which was made to it to the new object. So this object, by the way, is a connection container. I think I discussed it in a previous tutorial. The connection container, all it does is it houses each individual connection, and the reason for that is because it then allows us to do kind of management of all the connections, and that will be done in the server class, and then management of individual connections, so writing data to the client, that kind of thing, is handled within the connection container. So the logic is split between kind of the individual connections, which are within the connection container class, and management of the connections, which is done in the server class. So first thing that I'm thinking, if we've created this new connection container object, we are going to want to write the connection container object to our list. So we're going to want to generate a new connections object and add it to the list. So if I do connections dot add, and then if I do new connections, and cc, is it going to allow that or is it not going to allow that? Connections, why is that not allowed? Static. Okay, interesting. Yeah, we can make this static. Where does the static need to go? I think it needs to go here. Cool. Okay, so for anyone that's not familiar with how static context works, you have two states. You have static and you have non-static. Static is anything that can be created without the creation of an object. And non-static requires you to create an object. So in this circumstance, I'm not actually creating an object. And so by doing that, what would you say? It allows me to, if I'm not creating an object, it's being referenced within a static context. However, since this class is not static, that's not allowed, so I have to make it static. Equally, I think there is a way around this. I'm not actually sure which one's going to be more efficient. We're going to have to test this. So what I can do is I can do... Oh, that's a problem. So yeah, our object is called the same thing as our list. Call it. So we're going to rename the object because otherwise it's going to cause confusion with our lists and our connection objects. So we're going to instead call them server connections. And that way there's no confusion. So let me just change that. Okay, so that should work fine. So if I then change this, server connections. Okay, so now it knows, okay, well, you're definitely not talking to the list, you're talking about the connection objects here. Fine. So what I can do is I'll call it S connections. Server connections, and then we'll pass CC as a parameter. Oh, why aren't you happy with that? Cannot be referenced from a static context. Make main not static. Wow, I don't want to do that. That's interesting. Let me undo this quickly. Okay, so what I think the problem is, I think there's a difference between this class being within the server class and this connections container class being its own class. So, oh, okay, I think I get it. Okay, so I think the reason why the server class can't be, the connections class can't be executed is because even if we do create a new instance of it, so let's say we copy this line, which is basically what we did, but we're creating a connections object rather than a connection container. The reason that isn't working is because I think we probably need to create an object of type server. And if we create an object of type server, we can then call the connections class, because the connections class is an object within the server object. But since we don't want to do that, I think it is probably better to leave it as static. I feel like we'll probably run into an issue in the future, and then I'll just sort of have to come up with something. But for now, I think this is probably the best way of doing it. So what we've got for now is we've got a list of connections, and every time someone connects to the server, it adds a new connections object, which we've defined. It adds that new object to the connections list. Now, Okay, so within that, there's gonna be some logic. And I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put it in a new method actually. So I have this right connection, and I think I'm gonna make another method called save connection. So what we're gonna do is, in my head, I'm gonna move this line down to my save connections. Fantastic. And then we're gonna call save connections up here. Ooh, there we go. Oh, why are you? Oh, it's got to be static, hasn't it? Do we want it to? Yeah, why not? We'll let it be static and wait till it breaks. Or we'll let it be static and it will solve all my problems. Or it could just be because I spelt it wrong. That's also possible. Can I make it not static, or is it going to get upset? Yeah, it's going to get upset. Okay. So, what are we going to do? The aim of save connections is to determine which of the connections constructors we're going to call. So we've got two, and those are this top one here, where we just save the connection container, and this one here, where we save the, well, if we code it correctly, we're going to save a boolean that says that the connections are connected together. So, i.e., you have an opponent, two client connections are communicating with each other. And if that is the case, then the boolean is equal to true. Also, we will have the element number. So the element number is the index of the connections object that your opponent has within the list. So if you remember last time, I wrote out a list of people. Dave, Paul, Bob. There we go. Bob. So if you're Dave and say your friend is Paul, you say, okay, his name's Paul, look for Paul. Okay, I found Paul. But say, I don't know, Eric comes in. I think that's how you spelled Eric. You got to check Derek and then you got to check Paul. However, if you say, okay, well, Paul's in slot 3, job done. You can immediately point to Paul and you can skip the searching process. And if we have a lot of connections, that will be more efficient. So, how do we define, how are we going to check if a connection has a connection to it? Well, by default, if a connection is available, so if someone's waiting for an opponent, then connected is set to false. So if I write what's it going to be? Yeah, boolean get connected. So we're going to write another getter method for the connected, the connected attribute. And all this is going to do is it's going to return the value of connected. So, in order to determine whether we connect a client or whether we just save it as it is, what we're going to do is we're going to go down the list. So, in order to do that, we're going to need a for loop. So, the for loop is going to start at 0. X is less than. Are we going to need to pass it the list? Or hang on, is this the list global? The list is, do I want to have the list global? Ooh, good question. Probably not. No. Okay, I'm going to move that. Cool. Okay. So you'll notice I dropped the static and I dropped the private. And that is because since I've moved it to the main method, the access modifier, that is the private, is implied. So if this variable is declared within the main method, it can only be used within the main method. Equally, since it's within a static method, it's automatically used statically since it's executed within a static method. So yeah, I can just drop those, and now I just have a connections list. So what we're going to do is, I think I'm going to pass this variable. Yeah, okay, that's fine. So I'm going to pass this variable to save connection, and I am going to write it to the parameter list. Connections, connections, cool. Okay. So the reason for that is because we want to, well, we're going to want to search the list, and first and foremost, we're going to need to know how big it is so that we can configure our for loop correctly. So I think, yeah, size. So this is going to go and it's going to loop through every single element of this connections list. What it's going to do is it's going to check two things I want to say. It's going to check whether or not actually, is it going to need to? No, it's not. I was going to say that it's going to need to check the port number of the connection container so that it doesn't match to itself. But since we're only adding the connection to the list after we either connect it or decide to just store it, we won't need to bother doing that. So all we're going to do is we're going to say if connections dot get x. What's wrong with that? Dot get connected. Boom! Oh, I'm so shocked with this. So this part of the code here is going to identify a specific element of the connections list. So a specific connection, and it's going to say, are you connected? It's going to execute the get connected method. Now, if you remember, by default it's false. However, if it is connected, we'll call the second constructor and we'll set it to true. So if this returns as true, then I don't think we're going to want to do anything. So that's not particularly efficient. So if I switch this around, so if this equals false, so if the connection that you're searching does not equal connected, then we're going to want to execute the second constructor. So we're going to want to do connections dot add, and we're going to want to do new connections. Oh, is that going to cause a problem? I think, yeah, I think, you know what? What I did before makes sense. I'm just going to rename this because this list and this object are they're gonna cause some problems because I'm going to lose track of what's named what. So connections, fantastic. Yeah, I'm going to call it S connections for short. I know it's a bit fiddly, but I don't know. I think I'm just getting confused by having them as the same name. Yeah, it's cool. That's cool. Great. fine. Why aren't you happy? Oh, so I walled it up, that's why. Yeah, sick. Okay, and yeah, you're not going to be happy either. I need to change that to server connection. No. I think he's being stick, boys. Yeah, cool. Wow. I'm honestly incredible at typing. Sick. Okay, we've got no more errors apart from here, but that's just because I haven't written the lines. That's fine. So the connection, we've identified that it isn't connected to anything, so we're going to want to call the second constructor. So if you remember, the second constructor has three parameters: the connection container, the boolean, and the element number. So if I call server connection, oh, why have you done that? Okay. So I'm creating a new object of type server connections. I'm going to pass it the connection container. I'm going to pass it true, so it means it is connected now. And I'm going to pass it x, since x is the element number of the opponent. And boom, that's all there is to it. Do I need an else condition? I don't think so. So what we're saying is if it finds that it is connected, don't do anything. That sounds right. And in that instance, it's going to go back up to this. Okay, so sorry, you get element 0 of the list. Element 0 is connected. So, oh, why is this? Sure. Are you happy with that? Great. Okay, so there's a couple of ways to write that down. That was just a simplification of the syntax. So what it's done is this exclamation mark represents not. So it's saying if not then do this. So if not connected, do blah. That's all that's saying. Anyway, so we check an element 0. Element 0 isn't connected, we connect it. So we add our new connection. We say that our connection is in fact connected. Oh, that's a good point. That's something I've forgotten. Okay, yeah, I'll get back to that. Anyway, so we create a new connection, we say it's connected, and we give it the element ID, which in this case will be 0. If 0 is connected, this statement here is going to be true. The if statement isn't going to trigger. We're going to go back round the for loop, and we're going to increment x by 1. So then we're going to check number 1. Okay, is connection number 1 connected? I don't know. No, it's not. Okay, we'll go back around again. Is connection 2 connected? No. Is connection 3? Oh, sorry, is connection 3? Yes, they're all connected. Then what do you do? Well, this loop, for starters, this loop's going to fail because you're going to reach the end of the list. And in doing so, we're just going to go down to the bottom and we're going to save this as a brand new connection in the list. So in theory, it will be saved in pairs. So elements 0 and 1 will be connected, elements 2 and 3 will be connected, elements 4 and 5 will be connected, and so on. But just in case that doesn't quite happen, there's a little bit of contingency. So the thing that we do need to address is the fact that we need to update the connection that we are connecting to. So we'll have, when this statement finds an element that isn't connected, we need to update it and say, look, dude, you are connected. So how are we going to do that? Because the slight problem we've got is the fact that So telling the connection that already exists in the list that it is now connected, that's easy. What I'm struggling with is how do we give it the element number? So let me explain. So if we write another method down here, public void set connected, boolean connected, fantastic. This dot connected equals connected. Okay, so this method, all it's going to do is going to take a parameter and it's going to save it to the connected value, the connected attribute, sorry. So that's fine. In this instance, all we would then need to do is s.connections.get x dot set connected, and we'll pass it true. So there you go. It now knows it's connected. Okay, so I've come up with a solution. First thing that I think we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create our server connections object outside of this add. So instead of just putting new, we're going to put the sort of the full syntax. We're going to have an object which we can access. Okay, so that's that done. So if you can see, the code ident is the same, except we're saving this value to a variable first and adding the variable to connections. The variable is identical to putting this syntax on its own. However, I think we're going to want to use this variable because what we can now do by having this variable is we can run the index of. So if we use the index of and pass it this variable, it's going to scan the list and identify where this value has been saved to. Can I do that? Yeah, sick. Okay, so we're still gonna write a server connection to our S connections list. That's fine. What we are not gonna do, however, is what we are gonna do instead of the previous approach is we're not just gonna put we're not just going to call the constructor directly. We're going to create an object first. We're going to pass that object, and then we're going to scan the list for the index of that object. So this method here is going to say, okay, so where is this object stored within the list? That value will then be saved to index once it's found. And then the last piece that we need to write is set element number. Okay, so just like the method above, int element number, and we're going to do this dot element number equals element number. Fantastic. And then if we go back up to this index, we are going to do sconnections dot get x set element number index. Cool. And that, I believe, is it. I am not going to bother testing this today because my head is just crammed right now. So if you've got any questions, or if you go ahead and you find that there are errors, I'll be posting another video in a couple of days, sort of running through this, checking that it works. I'll probably do some of that in my own time as well, just so that I can iron out the really silly mistakes, like if I've accidentally spelled something wrong or something stupid. I hope this makes sense. I hope this was useful, and I'll see you guys in the next video.